So that first part was all about the traveling, and now I just want to talk a little bit about unearthing heirlooms from the past. So is anyone here familiar with the ancient watermelon story? Nice. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about retracing that story. Last September, myself and the Gettles, we embarked on a pretty wild trip. We went to Nevada and to Utah to retrace and further investigate a story that we had been given a tip about a few years ago. So the ancient watermelon begins with Greg Batt. Well, our involvement and our understanding of this story begins with Greg Batt. This man here with the watermelon, he sent us a letter saying, I want to tell you about the story, this local legend, this local story we have in an article I came across about a man who in the 1920s found an ancient bottle of seeds deep in the recesses of a cave in an ancient Anasazi dwelling in Arizona in the Mogollon Rim in the White Mountains. And locals are said to be passing around these seeds and growing this watermelon. And the really crazy thing about this watermelon is that when the man who found the jar of seeds, he planted them and grew them, he noticed that the fruits had a strange handle shape to them. So he sent us an article in an old magazine from the 70s or 80s, and he said, you know, you might want to follow up on this. I believe we had been offering a seed called the ancient watermelon, and it did not have a handle shape to it. He said, maybe there's some connection here. And we realized that there was a connection. So this is the story of the ancient watermelon. So this is a reenactment photo. We made a really fun video about this story. And so this photo of this young man looking at this bottle of seeds, that is a reenactment photo. But as the story goes, as we read in this magazine, and we were told by Art Comby, the man who found them, his descendants, Art Comby was looking for artifacts in a cave in the late 1920s, around 1928. He was a horticulture teacher on a Native American reservation, and he and his students were looking for artifacts in a cave, and they came across this bottle, and the bottle was filled with seeds. And he was a horticulturalist, so he brought the seeds home and he planted them. And he said there were about 200 seeds in the bottle, and only about 12 germinated. But he did get those 12 to germinate, and when they grew, they had this really strange handle shape to them. They were small, about 3-pound melons with a tapered end and a handle shape. And because it was the 1920s, he didn't turn these artifacts over to anybody. And as his family says, there really wasn't anyone for him to turn them over to. And he just kept saving the seeds and growing the watermelon. He said it tasted really great. He said the shape was strange, but the flesh was amazing, deep, dark red, and super sweet. So because he didn't really appreciate the uniqueness of that handle shape, he actually worked for many decades, over 30 years at breeding the handle shape out of the watermelon, which to us is like so sad, because that unique shape is what makes the watermelon cool. But he wanted to make it more commercially interesting, so he bred this watermelon. You could see he's actually holding what he had. He's an old man in this photo, and he's been spending decades refining this variety. It's still got the flavor that he found in, with the original melon, but it's changed shape. So we wanted to kind of flush out this story because we were really interested. First of all, we wanted to find seeds of this watermelon. We wanted to see if anyone had been growing the handled version. What we discovered was that the ancient watermelon that we offered was indeed the same watermelon, but it was the version that he had created by many, many decades of breeding, so it was nice and round and it never shows the handle shape. But we thought there's got to be someone that he shared the seeds with back in the day who liked that handle shape and kept that. So we went to the Nevada desert where he was living to find out what was going on with all that. So we did track down the handled watermelon from some folks who were farming in Nevada, and they had received the seeds from a local seed-saving melon farmer, and this is where the trip got really interesting. They had gotten the seeds from Cliven Bundy. I'm not sure if you all know who that is, but he is a famous and infamous land rights, some people call him an activist, some people call him terrorist. Yes, there are lots of words that have been used about him, but he led the armed standoff in Oregon about land rights, and we don't make any comments on what he did politically, but he was the person who Art had handed these seeds off to early when he had just started growing the watermelon, and this was the person who kept the handle shape intact. So for decades, Cliven Bundy, who was in prison at the time that we went to on this trip, he had been growing out the handled version, and he'd been dispersing the seeds to his community in Nevada, and this small pocket of growers were growing the handled watermelon. So we were able to get that handle-shaped watermelon. We were able to interview farmers who received the seeds from Cliven and get their story. And we were even able to interview Cliven Bundy from prison. We got permission because we wanted to hear his story, because there weren't very many people still living who had met Art Comby and could tell us the story of how they received the seeds, and maybe had gotten the story from Art Comby about how he had found the seeds in a cave. So we did. We went to the Nevada State Southern Penitentiary. I didn't ever think my job was going to bring me to a prison in Nevada, but we ended up there, and it was really weird and interesting. And he was a really nice guy. We just talked melons. We didn't talk politics. And he told us that he was an old gardening pal of Art Comby's, and Art said, yeah, I found these seeds in a cave, and do you want some? And he gave him some of the original seeds from the jar. So Art had not started to breed this big round variety, but when he gave Cliven these seeds, and Cliven liked the handle, and he passed it on to people. Cliven he did breed it out a little bit, but he passed it on to people who really liked the handle. So this was the way that we were able to find the handled watermelon seeds. So it was really strange that we ended up in a prison in Nevada. So this, basically, I've now told you I've been to Peru, I've been to Trinidad, I've been to Europe, and I've been to a prison in Nevada. So basically, I'm covering the globe in a strange way. So after we got our interview with Cliven, we actually learned that he uses a really interesting technique of dry farming to grow this watermelon, because he was famous. Everyone we interviewed, all these various growers around the area who had the handled watermelon, because there were a few, they all said, you have to get Cliven's technique for dry farming. It's crazy. He produces the sweetest watermelons. So he did detail, and I wrote every detail down, and this is like through the phone monitor at a prison. I'm like writing down all of his details on how he dry farms this watermelon, because he is in southern Nevada. He said he doesn't water his watermelons during 115 degree, 120 degree weather, and you'll really just have to read it in we have an article about it on our website, because it's very detailed, and I'm not going to be able to bring it all up, but we have a detailed dry farming guide for how Cliven Bundy grows these melons that you can check out. After we did our interview, and after we met some folks who were growing the handled watermelon and obtained seeds from them, then we got in the car and we drove up to Utah, where just outside of Salt Lake City, where Art Comby's grandson lived, because I can't remember how we got in contact with, but we ended up getting in contact with the descendants of the man who found the seeds, the descendants of Art Comby. So Kirk Comby actually still had the vessel that the seeds were found in the 1920s. He still had it in his possession. So we were able to interview Kirk about his grandfather. We were able to photograph the vessel where the seeds were found in. Actually, so in this photo, you'll see there's a small vessel and a large vessel. As it turns out, there were two on the shelf of this cave that Art found, and one had seeds. The small one had about 200 seeds in it, and the large one was empty. And he saved both of them, and he passed them down to his most horticulturally fascinated grandson, who was Kirk. And so we had a really fantastic time. Kirk reminisced about his grandfather, and we ate watermelon with the family, and we really came full circle. We learned everything we could. The only thing that was really unfortunate was that there was absolutely no connection to anything about the Native Americans who had originally grown this seed, because there's just no way to know. He couldn't have gotten the seeds carbon dated or checked. We've talked about possibly getting the vessel carbon dated to find out exactly when these seeds were grown, or when these seeds were placed in this vessel, but it's really hard to tell. So that's one part of the story. Maybe we'll learn eventually, but it's the missing link. What we really have and what we've been able to learn is basically about the man who found the seeds and his story from there out. We really haven't been able to find anything about who was growing the seeds originally. One university has postulated that it was Basket to Anasazi Native Americans, but we really don't know. So we'd like to learn more about that, but that's the part of the story that we've been able to come full circle and learn about. And it was fascinating.